Hi and welcome to another episode of Delaware County Political News, Meet the Expert. We are here with part two with Cliff Wilson, former chairman of the Delaware County Democratic Party, and he is the current chairman of the Southeast Delco Dems. Please don't forget to see part one where Cliff Wilson discusses his candidacy and the Southeast Delaware County Democrats. Cliff, you are a scholar of history and you studied Delaware County.
Yes.
Please share what research you have conducted of Delaware County political history.
Well, when I first moved to Pennsylvania, I got myself a book on the history of Pennsylvania, and I then found a very interesting book that I could buy that was a history of Delaware County up until the Civil War. So I thought that was very interesting. And then when I became the Democratic County Chairman in 1994, I went to the archives of the Delaware County Daily Times and tried to read as much as I could about the Democratic Party and Democratic Party history. Now there wasn't, in those days, every 2 years a chairman had been elected, then it became 4. And the Delaware County Times would have an article before the person was elected, when the person was elected, after the person was elected. And then there wasn't much coverage of Democrats after that. It was around closer to the late 90s and 2000 when the paper started giving a decent amount of coverage to our candidates, and certainly when the advent of Joe Sestak, when we got first page coverage. But so I've done a bit of research, because not being from the county, in fact I was 40 when I moved here, I didn't have innate, ingrained knowledge of the people, the places, the things.
Cliff, you talk about a book about Delaware County, but you're going back hundreds of years.
No, that's old history.
You're not talking about ruling suburbia, which is a more current book.
No, I did read that too. Actually, what's an interesting thing, that book was based on a PhD dissertation.
John McLernand's book.
Yes, and a good friend of mine and activist Democrat, Bill Lewis from Springfield, had a copy of that PhD dissertation.
I have a copy.
Which he lent to me. Now, I haven't actually read the printed book, but I read the dissertation, which really brought the history through the 20th century.
Sure. And you've also read that too, of course.
Well, yeah.
Sure. Certainly. From your knowledge and research, describe the history of Delaware County, paying particular attention to the different eras of this past 100 years.
Well, up until really this century, so we're talking about the prior centuries, the 19th, the 20th, and actually even the 18th, it's pretty much been a one-party area. Dominating. Federalist, Whig, and then Republican. And there were Democrats, of course, in all those cases, and occasionally a Democrat would win. But basically it was what would be considered the more conservative party of its time. And pretty much one party, to the point where when you got to the 20th century, you had a very effective machine for that party. I mean, the Republican Party of Delaware County by the beginning of the 20th century was pervasive in every municipality. It had committee people, it had local elected officials, it had the ability to award contracts, which can often result in contributions. It had all that it took to build...
Contributions back to the party,
yeah,
of course.
Back to the party. It had all that it took to build an organization that could do two things. Control the nominations for office, because if there was a primary, you could win them. And win the election in November against an insurgent Democrat. I mean, in the 20th century, only in 1933 did a Democrat win a county-wide office. In Delaware County, won countywide office, elected sheriff for 4 years. And the Republicans had term limits in those days, so he couldn't even run for a second term. And that was in the midst of the Great Depression.
you summarized the last 100 years in 3 significant eras when we spoke before. Share that with our viewers.
Well, I think there was if we're talking just about the 20th century, I think there was certainly the pre-World War II era, which would be solidly Republican, except for that one Democrat, Mr. Nate Peachin, who got elected in 1933 as sheriff, the one office he won. And it was pretty much solid Republican, a Republican machine. The ultimate leader is a man named John McClure, and you will hear the term McClure Democrats. Well, McClure Democrats were Democrats who decided they could get further and could get more things done by cooperating with McClure and the Republicans than running against them.
So it was pre-World War II?
Pre-World War II. You asked the 20th century, so we'll say 1900 to 1945 if we don't want to go back past that. Then I think there is an era after World War II that probably reaches, I would say it probably reaches until about 1980. That's the era in which there was some competition. Democrats became more competitive, and because of an ultimate division in the Republican Party, we were able to elect a Democratic congressman, some state representatives, and a state senator. Now, all that was done in the 1970s, but most of those individuals only served 1 or 2 terms, except the congressman. He served 4 terms, Bob Edgar. Because, as you know, in 1980 began the Reagan Revolution. And the lower middle-class people of the southern part of Delaware County, who had reacted somewhat favorably to Richard Nixon, reacted very favorably to Ronald Reagan. There was a resurgence. We lost all those Democratic seats. We at one time, at the time when Reagan started, we had majority control of almost half the municipalities, but it all went south. I mean, everything got lost, and by 1986, when Edgar, who had promised to serve only a certain number of terms, sought to run for the Senate, we lost that seat too. So that we went into a time period with no Democratic elected officials in the late 80s.
So that second period was
I would say it would be after World War II and into the Reagan era.
80, 84.
Sometime in the 80s, whatever.
Okay.
And then you have the post-Reagan era. And that's when the Democrats start to rise in Delaware County. Not in 1988, but in 1992, Delaware County votes for the Democratic candidate for president in every election. In 1991 special election for United States Senator, Delaware County votes Democrat for a man named Harris Wofford against a Republican icon named Thornburg. And our county council candidates reach 40% because of the huge turnout that comes out in that odd-numbered year because of that special election. So now people began to say, well, you know what? These seats are competitive again. We can win some things again. I was elected county chairman in 1994. And we tried. I mean, we really did. We didn't have, here's the thing, we didn't have the money, and we didn't have the resources. We had good people willing to run. We didn't have the money, we didn't have the resources, and we had a overwhelming Republican edge in registration, but Republicans who voted for our candidates, but at the presidential level.
Let's discuss that. With that background, Cliff, with that foundation, let's discuss the most recent time, that period, when you were chairman of the Delaware County Democrats, that 16-year period between 1994 and 2010. As you explained, that time the Republicans held power in a vast majority of townships and boroughs. Describe the climate in the county during the time? What were people's attitudes?
I think the climate from a county perspective was that people were fairly complacent. We had a county government that didn't do very much, but that's okay. They didn't want it to do very much. You know, the county tax rate was very low because the county didn't want to spend on anything. That's why we don't have a health department. That's why Delaware County Community College is financed by school districts. And the property taxation of school districts, because the county wouldn't put any money into DCCC.
What were people's attitudes about the GOP, about how they would vote?
I think the attitude about the GOP was, look, they're in charge. They're going to decide when the garbage gets picked up. They're going to decide when the snow gets cleared. They're going to decide, the DJs are going to decide which kids get picked up for loitering. I mean, there was a general attitude, I wouldn't call it an attitude of fear, but just an attitude of, you know what, I should go along to get along. And so, you know, the Republicans are running the show. Being a Democrat, supporting a Democratic candidate, whether it was 96 for state rep and a seat we almost won in the West, or certainly after the year 2000, which is another sub-time period, there was just generally an attitude of, well, it's the way it is, okay? It's, I don't want to say it's like a Republican in Philadelphia, but it's like the way it is. These guys are in charge, and yeah, I've been Democrat all my life. I like the Clintons, I like Gore and so forth. I'll join and be a committee person, but it was a lot of work.
What was
recruit committee people?
What was the biggest disadvantage that Delco Democrats faced during county elections?
Well, I think the biggest disadvantage was that you had these 3,000 county employees that were all Republican Party workers. They were committee people, or they were families of committee people, or they were local elected officials, or they were relatives of local elected officials. So you started on election day. And remember, we have, I think it's 400 plus precincts. We have 3,000 people. Before you have to go out and get volunteers. Now, Republicans also could get some volunteers, and some of their candidates could. They started at a base of 3,000. We started at a base of a few hundred committee people. When I became county chairman in 1994, we had 300 committee people. Okay, I got that number up to 600. It wasn't easy. I'm not going to say everyone was a, you know, Energizer bunny, but we got it up, and we focused on registration. We have come a long way. In 1995, as county chairman, I announced how thrilled we were that one precinct in Upper Darby, called 5-5, now had more Democrats registered than Republicans. One precinct out of 140 precincts? No, 72 precincts in Upper Darby. Today, Upper Darby is almost a Democratic township. Democrats win. They can hold office. We have a state rep. They elect council people. I think they've got a good shot this year township-wide. And they vote at the top of the Democratic ticket. So we're talking about 12 years ago, one precinct.
Why such a dramatic surge in such a short time?
Well, I think part of it was the moving of people in from Philadelphia. There's no question about that. I think the other part of it was the national politics. In Delaware County, people liked Clinton. They liked Gore. He won the county. They loved Obama. They liked Kerry. John Kerry won this whole area. And when I say Delaware County, this southeast area we're talking about, right? Drive down and see all the American flags, but they didn't care about swift voting. They voted for John Kerry. And they voted twice for Barack Obama. And then, unlike other parts of this state, they didn't change their mind. They voted for Hillary Clinton. The point is, I think more and more people began to say, look, I'm in sync with what the Democratic Party wants to do. Why not see what they want to do here in the county and in the boroughs and in the townships? And I think more people, good people, like the people that are running this year countywide, came forward and offered to run it. Let me tell you that when I was county chairman, certainly the first 10 years, you had to spend time talking people into running. The very first ticket I had to run in 1995 for county council, we had to run 3 people, and I had 2 people. One was very interested, the other one was a good person and was quite willing to run, and he needed 3. The night we needed 3 that year. And the night we voted for endorsements, we met at 7 o'clock. I picked up the phone at 6 o'clock and I called a gentleman whom I have a high regard for. He's still around, Bob Diamond. And he had run for this office, county council, hadn't done well before. And I called him up and I said, Bob, I need you to run for county council. We have to have a 3rd candidate. We can't just not put up 3, we have to put up 3 candidates. You've done it before. You were mayor of East Lansdowne. I said, I think then he lived in Spring for a while in the media. I said, would you please do that? He said, well, I really should talk to June about it.
His wife.
Yeah. When do I have to let you know? I said, well, go endorse at 7 o'clock. He said, all right, I'll run. And I mean, that's how you got people to run. Now people
you actually anticipated my next my question. What was it like being a chairman back then? What difficulties did you face?
That was one thing that was difficult, getting people to run. The other thing that was difficult was getting people to be committee people. And we found we were our own worst enemy. We found that we had put a rule in the bylaws of the Democratic Party that every time we appointed a committee person, we had to notify the Board of Elections. There's no such law about that, by the way. Their job is to run the elections, and if you're an elected committee person, sure, but appointed, they had no right to this. We had it in our bylaws. So I followed all the rules, and I would send these names to the Board of Elections. One time, I sent to the Board of Elections a list of 4 or 5 names, and the letters to the individuals appointing them didn't get sent out. I don't know, I think it was a mistake. They got put in the wrong box in the office. And within 2 days, I'm getting these people who didn't have the letter from me appointing them, calling me up and saying they don't want to be the committee person anymore. Well, what was happening was the Board of Elections was giving those names to the Republican Party the minute I was appointing people, and the Republican Party was lobbying those people not to take the appointments. Well, I amended the bylaws and chucked out the thing that said we had to tell the Board of Elections.
Sure.
I mean, but that was the kind of frustration we had. And raising money. We did raise, in my 16 years, $1 million, but that's over a 16-year period. When I became chairman...
That's less than $100,000
I know
a year.
that. When I became chairman, we had a $10,000 debt. We had a debt. I mean, the first year we had to raise money to pay the debts. It was hard to raise money.
Do you know what the Republicans had in contrast per year?
Oh, well, the Springfield Democrats had a treasury. The Springfield Republicans had a treasury of $300,000 just their own.
Per year?
Just about every year it was in there. I mean, they spent it, then they had to raise it again. I mean, the Republicans had no problem with money. They had no problem with people because they had all those employees. And they had no problem getting candidates because anybody who wanted to hold an office and was any good would be thrilled to be the Republican candidate because you're going to win. We had to go out and try to raise money, not an easy thing. Try to get workers. Try to get candidates, and we did those things. And I think that the second half of my chairmanship, after the year 2000, showed that we actually did. We were successful in the first half in trying to get those things. Oh, there's 20 minutes.
Cliff, I have to ask you. I want to thank you for all this valuable information. Do you have time to stay with us for a little bit more?
Yeah, sure.
We have been here with Cliff. We have been discussing the history of the Delco Dems and the history of the GOP political machine. And we have been here with Cliff Wilson, and I am your host, Larry DeMarco. If you like this video, please forward it to your entire contact lists and Facebook friends. And if you like my website, please don't forget to like, follow, share, and subscribe. we are signing off. Tune in next time. Don't forget to stay for and watch part 3 of Cliff Wilson, where he's going to discuss campaign strategy of the GOP while he was chairman. Goodbye for now.